Crypto companies are unwittingly hiring North Korean developers, and CoinDesk reporter Sam Kessler investigated over a dozen blockchain firms duped by the regime and posing cybersecurity and legal risks. Sam, what a remarkable story you've written. Crypto is a global industry that lives on the web, and there are no boundaries, and North Korea is taking advantage of this. So perhaps you could walk us through how you first began unwrapping this story and what you discovered along the way.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks so much, Christine. About a month back, a blockchain sleuth named Zach XBT, like this online investigator who's really incredible. Maybe a lot of people watching have seen him. He released this list of DPRK developer blockchain addresses, and he was like, "Hey, there's a bunch of companies that have hired people associated with these blockchain addresses," and he posited that these people were affiliated with the North Korean regime. And I actually hadn't seen this. Somebody reached out to us, and they were specifically interested in a particular blockchain ecosystem. And they were like, "Hey, I don't know if you saw, this tweet, but I think some of those developers." So the crypto companies were not named in Zach XBT's investigation. He said, "I think some of those developers might have, helped build this particular blockchain ecosystem." And so that kind of, sent me down this rabbit hole that expanded well beyond, that particular, set of developers. I learned that this has been going on since, well before 2018. The revenues from these workers are funneled back, according to the U.S. government and the United Nations, to the North Korean regime, and used to fund, WMD development. I mean, there's tons and tons of different companies that I spoke to over the course of my reporting for this, and this is the first time you'll see really any of those companies, or at least a critical mass of them, and some big ones named, in a news article. So it's been quite the rabbit hole.
Do you have an idea in your investigation with how far North Korea has infiltrated the crypto sector in terms of inserting developers working for the regime into crypto firms?
Yeah, how far they've gone. I mean, the thing that was pretty stunning here is, I mentioned that tweet that initially kicked off, our lead that we got when it came to investigating this initially. But there has been, some understanding percolating among the U.S. IT industry broadly and technology industry broadly that this is happening. But and we knew it was happening in crypto, and we can talk about why in particular. But what we learned over the course of our reporting was that this goes way, way, way deeper than at least I and any of the sources that I spoke to, other than a handful of experts, recognized. Meaning that individual companies will hire tons of DPRK workers, not just one. It's some of the biggest companies, not just upstarts. And when you apply for or when you put out a post to hire workers as a crypto company, it's not like you're going to get a few North Korean applications. Apparently, according to some of my sources, upwards of 50% sometimes of your applications will come from North Korea. So it's super, super widespread.
And you mentioned the why of why speculation has been floating around that there are a lot of North Korean workers out there in crypto. I guess the why would be because there are a lot of cybersecurity risks and hacks related to North Korea. Maybe you could go into that. What kind of risks this pose?
Absolutely. So there's a few reasons why North Korea will want to infiltrate technology companies generally and crypto companies in particular. One, the default reason is just to funnel revenues back to Pyongyang. That's like the main reason. And a lot of people think that it kind of ends there. And sometimes opportunistically they'll hack. But North Korea broadly is behind, they're kind of the biggest culprit that's been identified behind crypto hacks. And many times I've learned over the course of my reporting, IT workers are really intimately involved in those hacks. So what happens is oftentimes if a North Korean worker is at a crypto company, they'll have either direct access to systems that in the crypto world are flush with cash. There's way more money in crypto systems, just like for the taking, than traditional financial systems, in a certain sense. So that's one thing that you'll see. But oftentimes, just having access to individuals, with the private keys that allow them to control these, cash-rich systems, gives IT workers direct access to infiltrating these systems and siphoning the cash, back to themselves. And so we've got several examples in my story. One of the big ones is we found that Sushi, which was hacked several years back for $3 million, the funds were actually returned, and that's another wild story. But we think it was two North Korean IT workers.
And it seems that this is a vast network of IT workers. And you mentioned in your article there's a misconception by employers that North Korean developers are working independently from the regime's hacking efforts. So maybe you can explain some of those misconceptions, and how do these workers appear when they start contacting crypto companies to work for them?
Yeah, I mean, the general theme of this article is that, even if some people know that this is happening, it's happening at a way large. It being North Korean IT workers applying to crypto companies in particular, it's happening at a way, larger scale than anybody might recognize. Like I mentioned, that figure, the 50% figure. I mean, a lot of the applications that you receive are going to come from North Korean IT workers, if you're running a crypto company. So there's a few things that we noticed, just in terms of how they get into these companies. You asked about, Christine. So like one of them is they'll have fake IDs. So we have some of that in our story as well. You'll see like a Texas driver's license that belongs to one of these North Korean IT workers. So that's one thing. But if companies do pursue rigorous KYC background checking processes within their internal internal hiring process, that might actually be able to help weed out some of these employees. And it is not actually happening at a lot of crypto companies. So practices kind of need to mature a little bit, from a hiring standpoint. But I guess, another, so one of the misconceptions is just that, this isn't happening that much, or you'll be able to suss these people out just by looking at an ID. That's not, going to work. But another big misconception here, is that these IT workers are not, they'll be easy to kind of suss out, because, even if they have a GitHub account, like a coding profile or a resume, once you talk to them in an interview, one imagines that you'll be able to tell right away that they don't know what they're talking about, or, won't be able to communicate fluently on these technical topics. But some of these developers are really incredible.
It's stunning to me that in your article, with these crypto companies, they would have the worker join the morning meeting, but then later on in the day, the same worker would have no idea what they talked about in the morning, because it would be
Yeah.
someone different. So I'm
Yeah.
imagining in my head a warehouse of IT workers for the regime, clocking in and out, working for these different crypto companies. That's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah, I mean, Sushi, I mentioned them. So Sushi is a big decentralized exchange, and they had a suite of products, a few years back, and one of those products was the one that was hacked. I spoke to a couple employees of Sushi, who are not, from the DPRK, and one of those people told me that she would have conversations over video with one of the employees. She assumed that of these two employees that CoinDesk decided were linked to or discovered were linked to the DPRK, Democratic People's Republic of North Korea, or of Korea. To one of those employees would show their face, and it would always be zoomed in on their face in their calls. And the other employee, who she eventually sussed out was probably the same person, would not show their face. They were actually supposed to be different ethnicities. One was supposed to be based in Serbia. The other one was supposed to be based in the United States. But you would always hear the same background noise, and it sounded like they were in a factory. This
Wow.
person told me, and the face zooming was so that you couldn't see the background. So who knows?
Sam, any idea how many hacks in crypto, or how much money has been stolen by North Korea? I mean, we just had a huge hack at WazirX. one of the
Yeah.
largest India crypto exchanges, and
hmm
$230 million was stolen. I mean, who knows if we're seeing another tie to the North Korean regime here.
Yeah. So there's so the United Nations, we cited a report from them. There's a lot of stats that you can look at around North Koreans hacking apparatus when it comes to crypto, but around $3 billion has been stolen over the past 7 years, according to the UN, by North
Wow.
Korea specifically. Now, Chainalysis, which is a really great blockchain investigative investigations firm, they helped me out over the course of my reporting, with a couple interviews, and one of the stats that they gave me was that over the past year, half of the hacks that they tracked back to North Korea were perpetrated by, or at least aided by North Korean IT workers. So a lot of hacks in North Korean, and the IT workers do play a big role in, at least this year,
And
half of those hacks, according to them.
they're not using low level, I mean, actually, in your article, you are saying that they are using low level tech strategies like social engineering versus breaking into the mainframe. You can explain a little bit of that.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things that was also new to me over the course of my reporting here is when you hear that North Korea is hacking all of these companies, and you've been hearing this, especially as a crypto reporter, I've been hearing this for years now, you assume that they're doing some really sophisticated stuff where they're like doing some crazy networking stuff. They're plugging in all of these, weird, hieroglyphic looking codes. I used to study computer science. I'm sounding like I have no idea what any of this is, but I genuinely have no idea what any of this is when it comes to the hacking. It just sounded incredibly sophisticated. Like Mr. Robot, the TV show, but it's actually not like that. Most of the time, North Korean attacks, like you said, Christine, they use some form of social engineering, where it's not like they're actually just breaking into the back end of a systems through really, complex computer code. What they're doing is they're just, sending out a job offer to an executive and then sending them a Zoom link or a Google Calendar or a Calendly link that is just laced with malware. Or they'll just apply to your company and then get access directly to your system and then hack that way, like that sushi case. So there's, it's a lot less sophisticated in that sense, or in the technical sense, but it's very sophisticated in the social engineering sense. You assume it's like the hermit kingdom that's off, somewhere with no contact to the outside world. But that's just not at all the case in crypto.
How much do these IT workers make, and where does that money go?
That's an interesting part of the story too. So in a sense, these North Korean IT workers are absolutely, I mean, in a large sense, any North Korean is a victim of the regime from what we know about how that country operates. But North Korean IT workers in particular, the UN says, based on this report we cited, that 10 to 30% of IT worker wages go to the actual IT worker. So 30% is for the top earners, and 10% is for the rest. Meaning somewhere from 70 to 90% of the wages that an IT worker rakes in goes directly to the regime. And you can actually see on the blockchain. So a lot of our research was just by doing blockchain analysis, looking at payments. You can see money going from a company to who they think is, their typical developer, and then from that developer to an entity, all of the money to an entity that is sanctioned by the U.S. government as being a North Korean agent. So they're sending all their money somewhere else, and so that still might be a good standard of like good living in North Korea, though, just because the economics there. But anyway,
essentially, these workers are being exploited in the view of some of these crypto companies, right?
Absolutely. I mean, in my view, they're absolutely being exploited. And we have some quotes in there. If you're sending back 90% of your paycheck to somebody else, you're absolutely being exploited. So outside of the legal risks that these companies incur, outside of the security risks that these companies incur, there is, a moral risk beyond just helping fund maybe Pyongyang's nuclear weapons program, that you're, funding a weird modern form of slavery or indentured servitude.
Wow. What is the prevalence of North Korean workers in crypto? Just how common is it? I know you mentioned, 50% of applications could come in and be from North Korean workers, but
Mhm.
how common do you think it is in the industry and are other sectors, not just crypto, but other sectors in the tech industry or other uh, industries being targeted as well?
So this is common across the board. It's been since I think 2022 that at least in the US, some of these IT worker efforts on the part of the North Korean regime have been, flagged to US companies by US authorities. But it's been going back a while. And, since at least 2016, 2017, according to our research. And how deep it goes, like how large it is, there's a few, I guess, touch points that can kind of give us a sense. First off, according to the UN, I think it's around 3,000 to 4,000 workers globally, according to their report. I don't actually know how they gathered those numbers. That's like a whole separate reporting project that I want to do. But that's a lot of people. Anecdotally, when you speak to sources reporting on a story like this, you'll hear that most of the applications one receives when they put up a job posting come from these resumes and GitHub accounts, these coding accounts that one can, once you kind of know what to look out for, one can pretty easily link to North Korea. So they're applying a lot and they're working at a lot of companies. But broadly outside of crypto, it's also a thing. So there was recently from one of Google's security divisions, they released a report. We didn't actually link this in our article because it just was too long as is, but they found that a bunch of Fortune 100 companies were hiring a lot of these DPRK IT workers. So I think crypto is uniquely vulnerable for a lot of reasons, but this is a widespread problem.
Maybe you could touch on the red flags that employers should watch out for
Yeah.
to prevent
Um,
hiring
yeah.
DPRK workers.
Yeah. That was one of the things I was most curious about going into this. And we're going to write a separate, thing on, what sorts of things employers should look out for. One unfortunate side note to this. So when you ask employers, what they're looking out for, a lot of them told me that it's just people who don't put on their cameras, but also people with Asian accents. Which, first off, that encompasses a lot of things, but it also was something that is a concern to some people that I spoke to, as well as myself. Is like, as this sort of problem becomes more widely known, people are going to be discriminating against people just on account of an accent. But that also kind of just shows you how few touch points some people will have to figure out who these people are. But that's something that actually I heard a lot. So I'll be curious to see whether there is that sort of discrimination going on moving forward as more people become aware of this problem. Like, some people are literally discriminating on those grounds just to avoid hiring DPRK IT workers. But beyond that really superficial level, first off, background checking. You should use a professional background checking service if you want to see, if these, people are who they say they are. It's not enough to just look at a passport and an ID, or even a picture of a person holding up a passport. We've seen some of those. Those, will pass through. People see them and think that they're real, but they won't pass through a professional background checking service. Another thing is cameras. Sometimes these workers will use cameras. Oftentimes they will not. Another thing is just trust your gut about red flags. So if a person, we have speaking of accents, we have an example here where a person was supposedly Japanese. They had a Japanese accent, spoke Japanese, and then they dropped their Japanese accent one day, from one day to the next. That's pretty weird. This sounds like a different person, and it was. So those sorts of red flags, and there's a whole litany of examples there.
And if you hear a factory behind them, maybe it's
yeah.
a warehouse of IT workers in indentured servitude. Also, you mentioned the legal risks that accompany this, because even though a company may unwittingly hire a North Korean worker, which under OFAC sanctions you cannot do, it would be against the will, but it could potentially pose legal risks. But in this case, if you've been duped, not really. Maybe you can go into that.
Yeah. So I'm really fortunate that these companies decided to go on the record with me, because it does present a legal risk technically to hire these workers, whether or not, at least in the United States, that they are from North Korea. So The United Nations, starting in 2017, placed a bunch of sanctions that member states can adopt themselves and enforce themselves against North Korea, and specifically hiring North Korean IT workers, making it illegal if the states adopt it. The United States, there's been executive orders signed by President Obama and by President Trump that are specifically targeted at the hiring of DPRK IT workers, which make it very illegal to do so in the United States. And it's not just if you're in the United States. If you want to do business with the United States, you think back to FTX. Technically, they were headquartered in the Bahamas. This is not a North Korean thing, but they were still tried in the United States because their transactions hit U.S. wires. One can imagine examples where a crypto company, is ostensibly decentralized or is based in a country without sanctions, but wants to do business in a country that does sanction DPRK IT worker activity. Hiring those workers can hold risks for you if you want to do that kind of business in those companies or countries that make it illegal. The important thing is no crypto company has been prosecuted, at least in the United States or any UN member states that we're aware of, for this kind of behavior, just because they are really getting tricked. I imagine is why they haven't done it.
Just want to touch on this. I don't know if you know, but I mean, I guess the fear is that this money also funds the North Korean nuclear program. Any idea about that angle? If so, how much?
Yeah. So there's a lot of geopolitics at play here. According to the UN, $600 million annually, or up to $600 million, I think 250 to 600 goes to Pyongyang as a result of these IT worker programs. And according to the United Nations, the United States, that money is used to fund North Korea's, nuclear missile program. One thing, that is important here is there's obviously a geopolitical angle to anything like this. So it's hard for me as a reporter, especially writing about this very specific corner of this world, to vet that specific side of it. But according to these countries and these governing bodies, that is where the money is going. I mean, it's a one party, one state. The regime really is North Korea. So.
Speaking of which, in the midst of reporting this story, there were a series of coincidences. People who you had been interviewing with were getting hacked. Maybe you could go into that a bit.
Yeah, that's one of the wildest things. So this story starts with a company called Truflation. Stefan Rust, who's the founder, was kind enough to speak to me on the record about his anecdote of hiring a worker who he thought was Japanese, and then from there learning that worker and 4 of his other workers were North Korean. So towards the end of my reporting journey, I called him up to fact check some things, and he was a little bit late to our meeting. Turned out that he had been hacked, and he lost personally and his crypto project Truflation $5 million, and that came 2 weeks after another company that I guess opted not to respond to our request for comment, Delta Prime. They also, according to Zach XBT's reporting, hired. They according to his list of blockchain addresses, they appear to have hired at least one of the DPRK employees that he published. I've been trying to reach out to them. They also were hacked for $7 million. So it's hard to say this soon who the culprit was, but in 2 weeks alone, two of the companies that I was already talking to.
Through social engineering that somehow their North Korean hired worker, figured out their private key, or put a keylogger on their computer or something to make them at risk. I don't know if they suspected.
Publicly, neither company has linked this to North Korea. Delta Prime, I don't believe, has even confirmed that they hired a North Korean worker. Truflation, in our report, has confirmed it, but Stefan Rust doesn't know. He had just come home from Singapore, a blockchain conference, and then it happened, and one of his devices ended up getting malware on it. It's really hard to know, especially this soon, but it is a coincidence, and they come from a similar network. These workers.
Sam, I feel like I could talk an hour about this with you, but we're going to wrap it up here because, folks, you can read all about it on CoinDesk.com. Be careful who you hire out there, friends. All right. Thanks so much, Sam. And
thanks so much.
Folks, again, CoinDesk.com. Check it out.